listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, I will be talking about the Master of Suspense, the Magician of Mystery, the one, the only, Alfred Hitchcock. We have another very private individual on our hands again with Mr. Alfred Hitchcock, which I completely respect. So I won't have as much information about his childhood and adult private life as I do for some of our subjects, but that's just the way he wanted it. His life was his life, and his career was for us to enjoy. I think you'll still enjoy his story. Let's get into it. Alfred Joseph Hitchcock was born on August 13, 1899, in Leytonstone, England, which is now a part of Greater London. He was the third child for parents William and Emma. He had an older brother, William Jr., and an older sister named Eileen. There was actually quite a gap in ages between Alfred and his siblings. His brother was 9 years older than him, and his sister was 7 years older. So Ol' Hitch may have been an oopsie baby. William Sr. owned a successful produce business in Leytonstone, and Emma was, of course, a homemaker. When Alfred was 6 years old, the family moved a little closer to central London, to Limehouse, right near the River Thames. Here the family opened a fish and chip cafe and a fish market, and they lived above the shop. And I bet it smelled great. Young Alfred Hitchcock was a curious child, and you know how much I love a curious child as a teacher. He loved geography and studying maps, and he had a great fascination of what different modes of transportation provided for the world. By the age of 8, he had already ridden on the entire London bus line, which is vast, and he loved to spend time at the docks observing the merchant ships. He loved studying their schedules and their procedures. That curiosity got him in trouble at least a couple of times. The last time was when he was 6 years old. He got into a little mischief, so this is the parenting technique his father decided to use to handle the situation. He sent his 6-year-old son to the local police station with a note William had written explaining what Alfred had done. The police then locked him in a jail cell and told him that's what happens to naughty little boys. No, this is not a good way to handle that situation. William was half joking when he pulled off this stunt with his police buddies, but it traumatized the poor boy. Not surprisingly, Alfred Hitchcock had a lifelong fear of the police from that day forward. He said he didn't even like to drive because he was terrified he would get a speeding or parking ticket. That level of fear. And I'm sure a decent level of crippling anxiety. Poor kid. I can totally see my dad doing something like that when I was a kid, and he was a wonderful father, but the past and stuff. The Hitchcocks were devout Roman Catholics, and Alfred attended Catholic boarding schools throughout his childhood. These experiences built onto Alfred's disdain for authority because the nuns and priests at early 1900s Catholic boarding schools were not very warm and fuzzy. Alfred Hitchcock later said that he developed an intense sense of general fear from his time at the Catholic schools and their harsh physical punishments. Alfred was a very accomplished student. Unfortunately, the combination of Hitchcock's weight and his shyness resulted in him not having very many friends growing up. Luckily, I think he made up for that later in Hollywood, although he would always remain a very quiet and reserved man. I have to note, I read in a few sources that one of the convent schools Alfred attended was a mostly girls' school. It was described as, quote, for daughters of gentlemen and little boys, end quote, whatever that means. In 1913, 14-year-old Alfred's education advanced to the next step, which was the London County Council School of Engineering and Navigation, where he studied mechanics, electricity, navigation, and engineering. And he also dabbled in drafting, drawing, and even painting. He was a very artistic individual, and his creative mind craved the outlet that art could provide for him. The future was looking bright. He was a teenager, one step closer to adulthood and the big, exciting world ahead, and he was doing important things at school that would ensure a promising future. But then came a blow. Alfred's father, William, passed away in December of 1914 when Alfred was only 15 years old. He had been suffering from emphysema and kidney disease for a while. He was only 52 years old. This loss was obviously really hard on the family. Since William had been the sole breadwinner for the family, Alfred went to work to help support himself and his mother. His brother and sister had moved out as adults by now. His brother did come home to help run the fish and chip shop, though, so that helped. Alfred got a job at a telegraph company, and he later utilized his artistic skills by working his way up to the advertising department. He also did some writing for the Henley Telegraph, showcasing that great creative mind, and worked as an editor for the publication. In his spare time as a young adult, which I'm not sure how he had any, Hitchcock loved going to the theater and going to the movie houses to see the new form of entertainment on the scene, silent films. His favorite star was Charlie Chaplin. He quickly became absolutely fascinated with films and the process of making them. What a terrific outlet for a creative mind. He wanted to work in films. When he was 21 years old in 1920, Alfred Hitchcock began his career in films when he secured a job with famous Players Lasky Studio, which would eventually become Paramount. His job at Famous Players Lasky was to create the title cards for the films that displayed the characters' dialogue. Silent films, remember. So this was a very important job. Alfred Hitchcock wasn't the kind of employee who went to work, did the minimum required by his job, clocked out, and just went home every day on repeat. No, he was making good use of his time at work by using his keen observation skills to study and learn every single aspect of the filmmaking process. And those observations paid off big time when he was asked to direct a film called Number 13. This was a very exciting opportunity for the budding filmmaker, but the film was never completed. Still, it gave him a little dose of hands-on experience. Alfred Hitchcock's first official screen credit in a film was in the 1923 film Woman to Woman, where he was credited as the film's art director. Wanting to broaden his training and experience in the film industry, Hitchcock relocated to Germany in 1924 to work for UFA Studios, which was huge. He finally got his chance to fully direct a film that would be seen to completion in 1925. I believe he was in Germany for a year or so before returning to London. 1925 also brought love into Alfred Hitchcock's world when he began seeing a woman named Alma Revel, who worked with him at UFA Studios. She was an editor and screenwriter. The two lovebirds got married the following year in 1926. This is super cute. Alma was born just hours after Alfred, technically the next day, so they entered the world at almost the same time as one another. Meant to be. Now set off into married life and well on his way to a successful career in filmmaking in England, Alfred Hitchcock had his first critically acclaimed film in 1927. It was a psychological thriller, which of course would become his famous brand of film, called The Lodger, starring matinee idol Ivor Novello. The film was insanely successful and dubbed by many at the time the greatest British film ever made. I'm sure many of you know that Alfred Hitchcock was well known for making cameos in his films. Well, that tradition began way back in 1927 in The Lodger, which was only the third film that he'd ever directed. It happened not because he wanted to be on screen, but because he had to be on screen. The budget didn't allow for enough extras, so he had to become one himself. And thus began a great tradition. The success of The Lodger awarded him some invites to direct in Hollywood, but he wasn't quite ready to leave England quite yet. Hitchcock's success, and I assume Alma's professional success as a filmmaker and editor as well, afforded the couple a beautiful Tudor farmhouse on 11 acres of land in Shamley Green, Surrey. They were successful, happy, and very comfortable in their young new lives together. Their lives got even better when on July 7th, 1928, Alfred and Alma Hitchcock became parents to an adorable little girl named Patricia. She would be their only child and would always be the light of their lives. The first talkie film premiered in the United States in 1927, The Jazz Singer. It was 2 years before the revolutionary film technology was used in England. When that time came, Hitchcock had already completed filming on the picture Blackmail, and he really wanted to reshoot it as a talking film. But the film's actress had a strong accent that just wouldn't do, so he had the brilliant idea to still use her in the film, but have a voice double stand just off camera from her and recite her lines while the film actress mouthed the words. Dubbing wasn't invented yet, so he created his own. The first really true Hitchcocky Hitchcock film was made in 1934, The Man Who Knew Too Much, which some of you might recognize as a later Hitchcock film. This movie had all of the trademark Hitchcock classic elements and cemented him as the Master of Suspense. This film included a young Peter Lorre in his second ever film, and his first speaking English. It was kind of rough English, but he did well. I really like him. One of Alfred Hitchcock's most popular creative tools in his filmmaking is what is called a MacGuffin, and he would use it in most of his films. The MacGuffin described his approach of setting a plot at the beginning of the movie that would end up having little or no importance to the overall plot. It simply existed to set the characters and events into motion. For example, fast-forwarding a bit to Psycho, I'll explain the MacGuffin in that movie just to get an idea of what it is. At the beginning of Psycho, Janet Leigh's character Marion and her boyfriend Sam talk about his high debts and how those debts interfere with their ability to get married. Marion then finds her hands on a very large sum of money at work, and she decides to take the money and run. She's wrought with nervousness and anxiety about getting caught. A few things happen which heighten this fear, and the viewer is led to believe the money is central to the entire plot of the movie. Marion then, unfortunately, checks into the Bates Motel while on the run, and what happens there becomes the movie's plot. So now the money, which we were led to believe had an integral part of the plot, has nothing to do with the actual plot. It's simply a plot device that sets the true plot into motion. Part of what creates the suspense in a suspense film. Back to the 1930s. Hitchcock did a film adaptation of a novel titled 39 Steps in 1935, in which he did a little rewriting of the story to make it into a captivating screenplay. The author of the novel said of the finished film product that it was way better than his original novel, so that's pretty impressive. Alfred Hitchcock continued to turn out film after film. With each film, he utilized new techniques, new camera angles, new special effects, new visual effects, new action sequences, new forms of suspense for his viewers. His artistic mind was always working on the next creative idea. And he was often able to work side by his wife and best friend, Alma. They were a great team, both behind the camera and behind closed doors in their private life. Charlie Chaplin is quoted as later saying, "The Hitchcock touch had 4 hands, and 2 were Alma's." It came to a point where Alfred Hitchcock couldn't avoid Hollywood any longer. That was the place to be for making movies, and a few studio heads were trying very hard to get their hands on the brilliant British director. Well, David O. Selznick was the lucky winner. He secured Hitchcock under a 4-picture deal in 1939. Alfred Hitchcock later said, quote, "I wasn't interested in Hollywood as a place. The only thing I cared about was to get into a studio to work," end quote. And the mounds of money those studios had to work with was pretty appealing too. The Hitchcocks settled into a spacious apartment on Wilshire Boulevard and began the process of acclimating to their new country and new culture. Hitchcock's first film with Selznick International Pictures was a movie called Rebecca. Hitchcock was thrilled to have a big, huge Hollywood budget to make all of his directorial dreams come true. But Selznick didn't make it easy for him. He tried to control every single detail of the film, leaving Alfred Hitchcock feeling like he had very little creative control. But hey, wait a minute. Remember, the year is 1939. Luckily for Alfred Hitchcock, David O. Selznick is about to have a new passion project that will keep him quite busy. A new little obsession called Gone with the Wind. Maybe you've heard of it. So now that he got Selznick off his back, Alfred Hitchcock had a little more room to breathe. And Rebecca went on to win the Oscar for Best Picture. And Laurence Olivier snagged the Best Actor Oscar for the movie too. That dang movie Grapes of Wrath strikes again, winning the Best Director Oscar for director John Ford. That was actually a pretty epic couple of years in films. Just get a load of the movies that were up for Oscars at the 1940 and 1941 ceremonies. Gone with the Wind, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Wuthering Heights, The Philadelphia Story, The Wizard of Oz, The Grapes of Wrath, Citizen Kane, and of course, Rebecca. Wow, that is so many classics in such a very short period of time. What a great time in Hollywood history. Within a couple of years of arriving in California, the Hitchcocks purchased a beautiful home in Bel Air and a country ranch in the Santa Cruz Mountains. They would spend their next several decades there living a quiet home life out of the flashy Hollywood social scene. They really valued their quiet time together as a family. In 1941, Alfred Hitchcock first worked with the man who would become his favorite actor to work alongside, the amazing Cary Grant. The movie was Suspicion, and Hitch and Grant would go on to make 3 more highly successful movies together: Notorious with Ingrid Bergman, To Catch a Thief with Grace Kelly, and North by Northwest with Eva Marie Saint, who, by the way, is still gracing us on this earth at the age of 100 years old. She turns 101 on July 4th, so I have her on my list to cover that week. Alfred Hitchcock said of working with Cary Grant, quote, "Cary Grant is the only actor I ever loved in my whole life," end quote. Yeah, I can definitely see why. He seemed pretty lovable. Hitchcock was riding high in his Hollywood career right off the bat. But he experienced heartache in 1942 when his mother Emma passed away at 79 years old. And then tragically, his brother William died just 4 months later from an overdose. William was only 52 years old, tragically and ironically the same age as their father, William Sr., had been when he died. Alfred wasn't very close to his brother, but it's of course extremely sad either way. Having death hit so close to home made Alfred Hitchcock stop and examine his own health and lifestyle. He knew he lived a somewhat unhealthy lifestyle, and he wanted to change that. He was very overweight, over 300 pounds at this point, so his diet would be the first thing to change. Before he began his weight loss journey, his typical dinner would be roast chicken, boiled ham, potatoes, vegetables, and bread, with, of course, a nice relish tray and salad to start. And he's not leaving that dinner table without a big, fine dessert. He would drink a bottle of wine with dinner and have a couple of brandies as an after-dinner drink. That menu had to change drastically if he wanted to lose weight. I'm not sure what he was eating before for breakfast and lunch, but now it was black coffee only. No food until dinner. And dinner would be steak and salad. Oof, I bet that was a super tough adjustment. The plan did work and he lost a considerable amount of weight and felt healthier, but still he would struggle with his weight for his entire life. There was even some speculation that he suffered from a hereditary glandular condition that was the root cause of his struggles with weight. I mean, the guy was definitely not lazy, that's for sure. The 1950s were big for Alfred Hitchcock. He did Dial M for Murder with Grace Kelly, Rear Window again with Grace Kelly and James Stewart, To Catch a Thief again with, you guessed it, Grace Kelly, this time also with his favorite guy, Cary Grant, The Man Who Knew Too Much with James Stewart and Doris Day, Vertigo with James Stewart and Kim Novak, and the great North by Northwest with his guy, Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint, which, by the way, is the Hitchcock film I decided to watch while I did my research for this episode. Such a good movie. As you can see, Alfred Hitchcock discovered actors he liked working with and who worked well in his films, and he would cast them again and again. And he loved his Hitchcock blondes. Why mess with great? Plus, Hitchcock said that he would physically draw up each scene of a film down to the very last detail with sketches. And then once the script was done, he wouldn't look at it at all through filming. Because it was all in his mind. Every single detail. So I assume it could be really challenging to work with a director like this. You have to know how his mind works and what his imagination is envisioning for each scene. So when talents clicked, he kept them locked in. So I mentioned The Man Who Knew Too Much with James Stewart and Doris Day in the 1950s mix. But wait, Hitchcock already made a film called The Man Who Knew Too Much, didn't he? Yeah, he did, way back in 1934. But he did it again. He described it like this, quote, "Let's just say the first version was the work of a talented amateur, and the second was made by a professional," end quote. Alfred Hitchcock became a U.S. citizen in 1955. 1955 also signaled the debut of the television series Alfred Hitchcock Presents. The 1950s also brought a new kind of adventure into the Hitchcocks' lives too. Little Pat was all grown up now, and she got married and had 2 little girls of her own. So now Alfred and Alma were proud grandparents. Pat actually met her husband on a ship when the family was cruising to Italy, a vacation love story. Did you know that Alfred Hitchcock released a couple of albums? I didn't. Well, he did. His first album was released in 1958, and it's called Alfred Hitchcock Presents Music to Be Murdered By. And the album cover is great. Not 2025 great, but definitely 1958 great. It's simply Alfred Hitchcock in front of a dark background, wearing a suit and tie, with a gun to his head with one hand and an axe to his head with the other. And you bet your keister I listened to some of it while I wrote the script for this episode. And it's everything you'd expect from an Alfred Hitchcock music album. Alfred Hitchcock was nearing 60 years old by the time he busted out all these hit films, had his successful television series going, and of course that ultra-unique album. He was insanely wealthy by this point. He could hang up his hat at any time, but he didn't want to. He wasn't done yet. He can't bow out before giving us Psycho, right? Psycho was made in 1960, and it remains Alfred Hitchcock's most famous and most profitable film. But it didn't start out that way. Moviegoers seemed to like it because box office numbers were great, but many critics did not like it when it was first released. One critic at the New York Times called it, quote, "a blot in an honorable career," end quote. That's harsh. But like many Alfred Hitchcock films, Psycho went on to be discovered by a new generation and became a beloved cult classic. Hitch said it himself, quote, "My films went from being failures to masterpieces," end quote. He just needed a little more open-mindedness, I'm guessing. His creativity was far ahead of its time. Alfred Hitchcock loved making that album so much that in 1960, riding on the high of Psycho, he recorded another album, Ghost Stories for Young People. His TV show was so popular that CBS was airing reruns later in the day. If you haven't seen any of these, I want to share one of his host segments from the program. He's in a suit, of course, in a 1960s kitchen, ironing a white sheet on an ironing board. And here's what he says to the camera. And no, I will not be saying it in an Alfred Hitchcock voice. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen who may be malingering. Just make yourselves comfortable. We shall begin in a moment. Today, we are bringing you our television album, Pictures to Iron By, together with a few long-playing commercials. I wish to show you that murder, like romance, can flourish as well in the daylight as at night. It's all a matter of one's attitude." And I do need to say, he is not very good at ironing. His next project would be my mom's favorite, The Birds. Just kidding, she's absolutely terrified of birds. The Birds was released in 1963, but it had been in production for 3 whole years. Alfred Hitchcock spent a ton of time and a ton of money trying to create mechanical birds for the film. Over $200,000 $1963 to be exact. But he just couldn't do it, so he decided he would have to use real birds for that intense, iconic scene, which, as a lifelong animal rights advocate, I do not like. Tippi Hedren, like my mom, left the filming experience with a lifelong fear of birds. It was an extremely traumatizing experience for her. But she did return to work with Hitchcock in his next film, Marnie, alongside Sean Connery. 1965 brought an end to the highly successful 10-year run of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which had turned into the Alfred Hitchcock Hour partway through. 1966 marked the release of Hitchcock's 50th film. Wow. It was Torn Curtain with Julie Andrews and Paul Newman. Hitchcock and Paul Newman clashed big time during filming, and the movie didn't do too great. Topaz followed and was also not received very well. In 1968, Alfred Hitchcock had the great honor of receiving the Irving Thalberg Award at that year's Academy Awards ceremony. The Irving Thalberg Award is a highly coveted award presented periodically by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, named after the late, great MGM head of production, Irving Thalberg. And it is awarded to, quote, creative producers whose bodies of work reflect a consistently high quality of motion picture production, end quote. A few other recipients over the years have been David O. Selznick, Walt Disney, Cecil B. DeMille, Jack Warner, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Clint Eastwood. So the best of the best. Alfred Hitchcock suffered a heart attack in 1976. He had a pacemaker installed, and he got right back to work, announcing, quote, my batteries are fully charged. Here he was at 76 years old and not ready to slow down a bit. 3 years later, in March of 1979, Alfred Hitchcock was presented with the Life Achievement Award from the American Film Institute, another great honor. To prove how much he loved, respected, and appreciated his wife of over 50 years, he said in his acceptance speech, quote, I want to thank 4 people who have given me the most affection, appreciation, and encouragement, and constant collaboration. The first of the 4 is a film editor. The second is a scriptwriter. The third is the mother to my daughter Pat. And the fourth is as fine a cook as ever performed miracles in a domestic kitchen. And their names are Alma Revel. End quote. Doesn't that just give you goosebumps? They were married for 53 years when he gave that speech, and he clearly had so much love and respect for her still. I absolutely love that they had that. 2 months after accepting that Life Achievement Award, Alfred Hitchcock bowed out of the film industry. After 53 films over 60 years of filmmaking. His freshly charged batteries were now fading, and it was time to rest. One of the greatest honors of his life came in January of 1980 when he was appointed a Knight Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth II. Hitchcock was unfortunately too ill to travel to London, so the British Consul General came to him. He traveled all the way to California to present the great honor to Alfred Hitchcock with a special ceremony attended by many of his friends and colleagues, including Janet Leigh and Cary Grant. A reporter asked Hitchcock why he thought it took the Queen so long to present him with this high honor, and his witty little reply was, I suppose it was a matter of carelessness. Only Alfred Hitchcock could get away with calling the Queen careless. Alfred Hitchcock's batteries unfortunately continued to fade. He'd used them to power so much greatness in his life, but he was sadly out of juice. The creative genius passed away on April 20th, 1980. He was 80 years old. Screenwriter Ernest Lehman gave the eulogy at Alfred Hitchcock's funeral. He said, quote, how reassuring it's been that for practically all our lives to have been in the lap, in the hands, under the spell of this giant, this genius, this gentle man. Hitch, what happens next? End quote. The love of Alfred Hitchcock's life, his very best friend Alma, had overcome breast cancer in the late 1950s. In the late 1970s, she had suffered a stroke and had never fully recovered from that. She died only 2 years after her husband. Both Alfred and Alma's wishes were to be cremated and scattered in the Pacific Ocean. So they were together once again at sea and in the heavens. Now I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. Although he never won an Oscar for Best Director, Alfred Hitchcock is highly considered one of the best directors of all time. Steven Spielberg, M. Night Shyamalan, Martin Scorsese, Peter Bogdanovich, and Quentin Tarantino all consider him one of their greatest influences. One director who did not like Hitchcock's work, however, was Orson Welles, but it sounds like he didn't like a lot of other people's work. Bullet point number 2. While preparing to film the movie Notorious in 1946, Hitchcock had to do a little bit of research on uranium. Well, it wasn't the best time in history to be poking around asking questions about uranium, so he had the FBI tailing him for a few months under a cloud of suspicion. Bullet point number 3. Alfred and Alma's daughter Pat lived until pretty recently. She passed away on August 9th, 2021 at the age of 93. Bullet point number 4. Pat did appear in a few of her father's movies. She had roles in 1950 Stage Fright when she was 22 years old, 1951 Strangers on a Train when she was 23 years old, and Psycho when she was 32 years old. She played Marion's coworker at the real estate office in the beginning of Psycho. Bullet point number 5. Alfred Hitchcock liked to have fun, in his unique sense of humor sort of way. He loved to play pranks on friends and colleagues. One time, he hosted a dinner party and he had all of the foods that were to be served dyed the color blue. Why? Because there simply weren't enough blue foods. I mean, he isn't wrong. He would also play on people's phobias, like send them a box of mice if someone was scared of mice. Poor little mice, I don't like that. Sometimes he would just do silly things like show up on set in drag. You just never knew what to expect in the presence of Alfred Hitchcock. Bullet point number 6. Speaking of food, Alfred Hitchcock was allegedly terrified of eggs. He thought eggs were revolting, especially the yolk, and he would not touch them. Bullet point number 7. I found the Hitchcock's Bel Air home online, and it was last sold in 2023 for $8.8 million. It's 7,258 square feet with 4 bedrooms and 5 baths. It's a really beautiful home, but there were some really unfortunate decorating choices in the current photos online in its last listing. Like lots of blue in a couple of rooms. The breakfast room has a really busy blue floral wallpaper with matching blue floral drapes and a matching blue floral tablecloth. It all matches. It's open to the kitchen, which has blue marble countertops and blue rugs on the floor. It's pretty intense, but otherwise a gorgeous home. I'd totally live there. I don't know who lived there until 2023, but they really liked blue. They had blue umbrellas by the pool and I think blue cushions on the pool chairs too. Lots and lots of blue. Maybe a tribute to Hitchcock's worry about the lack of blue foods. I'm sure the current owner has taken care of that blue issue though. I'll post pictures of it on Facebook and Instagram so you can see that I am not overreacting about this. In conclusion, Alfred Hitchcock was in a league of his own in the film industry, and I don't think anyone else will ever join the legacy of his league. It's definitely a league of one. He set forth into the film industry in its infancy, and he created films through the evolution of motion pictures from silent films in the 1920s to the artistic masterpieces of the 60s and 70s. Just think about that. But he wasn't going to create movies like everyone else on this magical journey. No, his mind didn't work like that. He had his own mysterious gears grinding away inside of that head of his, and it came up with techniques and ideas unlike anyone else. Alfred Hitchcock was a true visual artist. He would say he uses his camera like a painter uses his brush. He was such a creative genius. He lived so far outside of the box that the box was nowhere in sight. He once said, quote, "I am a typed director. If I made Cinderella, the audience would immediately be looking for a body in the coach," end quote. He may say typed, I guess so in terms of making mostly suspense and thriller films, but within that genre, you never know what you're going to get when you begin a Hitchcock film. And oh, he was so funny. He had this completely Hitchcock dry sense of humor. No wonder his show was so popular. You couldn't help but love him. Thank you, Alfred Hitchcock, for showing us it's cool to think outside the box. Thank you for reminding us to always let our uniqueness shine, even if other people think it's strange. Because how dull the world would be without a little strange in it. And thank you for being a role model of a long, strong, respectful, and beautiful marriage. I think that might be your biggest accomplishment of all. And thank you all for listening. Please don't forget to follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. And wherever you listen to your podcasts, a 5-star rating and positive review would be much appreciated. If you're interested in learning about some bonus content, head on over to patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast to learn more. For this episode, I used a documentary titled Alfred Hitchcock, Master of Suspense, directed by Lindsay Luecht and produced by Richard Chechilo. I also used a book titled The Master of Suspense, The Life and Legacy of Alfred Hitchcock by Charles River Editors. Zillow and Redfin for those great house pictures. Wikipedia helped me fill in a couple of gaps. And my BFF, IMDB.